a lot of Patreon videos rendered in the bank, so that's been nice. I'm catching up on that before we leave.
Hello and welcome to Season 5, Episode 21 of Dualistic Unity. I am baked as hell. That's all I got. And ready to talk.
That's as good a start as any. I mean, why the hell not at the end of the day? I am likewise baked. And honestly, it's because we are 3 days away from the Netherlands retreat, and I know this is going to be released after the Netherlands retreat, but the first retreat for me was transformative, to say the least. And what I mean by that is so much of my life had kind of culminated to that moment, to that event happening, and people actually coming to have this conversation because it was a priority to them. This was something that I had dreamed about forever. Now we're meeting people on the other side of the world, and there's a good many of them. And it's surreal to me. It's incredible to me to watch these cycles now, from one retreat to another, from one mini retreat to another. Eventually we're going to have other events, but even just these episodes and the conversations that we're having, like, it's incredible how much my life feels like a dream. It really does. And it has for a long time. But within that dream, I kept thinking, like, well, yeah, but okay, so it's a dream, but it's still the real world. I got to tense up. I got to maintain control. I've got to know what's going on. I got to know where I'm going. There's responsibilities, stuff like that. And it's not that that's not true. It's not that that's not true. But so much of my fear and my tension and my self-judgment had nothing to do with any of those things. It had nothing to do with the responsibilities. It had nothing to do with the day-to-day. It had nothing to do with going to work. Me bitching about work had nothing to do with me going to work, and everything to do with my attitude towards my own existence, towards my life, towards my relationship with myself. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. And that's really it. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. It really does matter where I'm coming from all of the time. And if I'm perceiving myself as somebody who can be in control, if I'm perceiving myself as somebody who can be more valuable, who can be more intelligent, who can be more, then I'm never actually in my life. I'm never actually in myself. I'm always in some illusion where I'm trying to be something else. And I can't be. I can't be something other than what I am. But I don't even know what that is. So why am I trying instead of just exploring what I am here and now? And that very much is a dream. That's what a dream is. It's the experience of you exploring yourself.
Well said. And that's actually the one of the thoughts I was having earlier today was along the lines of how easy it is to talk about it and say stuff about, you know, unity being one, all those things, but it's not even like remotely about that necessarily, because as long as there's someone saying those things and taking any degree of ownership for those statements, then it's not really being applied. It's not really being done at all. Like, and so I've been just thinking about just, you know, unity, all that stuff. And like in terms of social media and whatnot. And like, if I can't say it, then all I can do is be it. And all I can do is express it. And like, there's no way to possibly say it in a way that couldn't possibly be distorted or looked at it differently based on the person listening. And so if that's the case, then it's like there's nothing to do in the sense of a necessary like thing, like all, and there's no one to look to either, because as long as someone else is being looked to, then it's not you doing it. And so there's no way, like it's literally impossible to even look at someone else and wonder. Like it has to be full and entire responsibility. on yourself. Like, you can't even like and admittedly, because 'cause I'm fucking stoned as hell right now, but, I've looked at Ray in that way, absolutely, as someone who knows, the right way to do it. I swear to God, the amount of times that, I'll have a thought about something, and, this is funny, but it's also, I'm being very real. What would Ray do or what would Ray say? And how much that is like that hesitation, that slight hesitation where it's not you, it's not me doing it. And I swear it's so funny, saying this because it feels like there are times where you are in my head, but in the sense that there's almost the reality of what I know is to be done in a sense, or not even that because there's no certainty with that, but it's definitely been something where it's less so my own exploration of what it means to be alone, what it means to take that on in the sense of not taking something on, but just not looking to anyone else and just feeling that sensitivity to what's happening and making the decision entirely on your own and learning from that and being willing to learn from that and find out, as opposed to trying to take the step and then measure what you said based on, thinking about it more or some shit. It has to be that continued evolution entirely on your own. It has to, you can't look to anyone else. So this isn't, and how many times, Ray said this isn't a community at all. Cause it literally can't be, as long as, and it's great to have the discussions and talk with people about things. It's a great thing to do, but to think, and I've certainly thought this for a long time, that there's some degree of finding out more that you couldn't do on your own through the interactions and the conversations. If there's even a fraction of it being looked to someone else, or a sense of community, that it isn't just you doing it. And again, it's not, I'm not saying this in a right or a wrong way, but like any degree of thought about what someone else would do, it's not just coming from you, and there's the, immediate continuation, or continuation of yourself as something separate. As long as you're looking at someone else thinking there's anything that you're going to get from them, you'll see yourself as some degree of separate.
I love the fact that, first of all, I want to find it. I just want to say, because you're not the first person who's said that, sometimes I wonder what Ray would do. And I always find that funny, because if you think about it, what you're doing is you're putting yourself in a position where you can imagine yourself being me. So what you're really wondering is what you would do as me. And instead of wondering what you would do as me, you should wonder what you're doing as you. Like, that's the whole point, right? Because you're still just looking at yourself. See, you're looking at me going, what would Ray do? But you're not really looking at what Ray would do. You're looking at what your idea of what Ray would do, which is you in Ray's body. So that's all you're doing. This is why when people are like, what would you do? I'm like, whatever it is you're doing. Whatever I would do in your situation is what you're doing. There's nobody who knows the moment you're in better than you, because you are that moment. You are that moment. It's funny, and this is the reason I'm so hesitant to think that I know better about anything. And it's just because our lives are so very different. Knowing something at the wrong time can make things very difficult, right? Like, let's just say that you knew how to drive when you were 6. So you're out there trying to drive in your 6-year-old body. This would make things very difficult, right? And so things evolve over time. We evolve over time. Things change. And as we grow, our understanding of ourselves grows. But that can only happen based on what we already know, based on what we've already experienced. We can't leap ahead, because in doing so, we're shortcutting a lot of things, including knowledge about ourselves. We try and gain so much knowledge about the world around us, but we forget that it's all going to be filtered through how much awareness of ourselves we have, how much knowledge of ourselves we have. right? Like you can know a lot in terms of school and still feel anxious and competitive all the time, right? And so lessons change, we change over time. I just want to say to everybody who's currently in the chat, it's nice that you could join us today. This was an impromptu episode. We just decided let's do it live, as we've done, I believe, in the last episode as well, and one other time in season 5, because it's a lot of fun to do. So thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. Yeah. So see what I would do now in your position probably isn't the best thing to do in your position. Like if I were just to superimpose myself into your life right now, if I were to take over Andrew's body with Ray in the saddle, as it were, all of the collection of thoughts and memories and whatnot. Could you imagine the havoc, just the fucking sheer damage I would do to everything in your existence, all the people you know, all of your relationships? Like the first person to talk to me would be like, "Are you okay?" Like it would be brutal. So the last thing you want to know is what I would do in your position. It really is just about relying on yourself, because that's what I would do in your position. I would rely on myself.
That was for anyone listening, I was fucking crying laughing through that entire thing because I can only imagine, and that's what I'm looking at when I think, what would that be? And it's not to say that that isn't an option, but again, it's it's something that would happen probably far more quickly in whatever way, shape, or form that's done, like possibly overnight. No, but that's fucking funny. But how much and okay, so on top of that, like looking to someone else or thinking about what someone else would do, like even the thought of, like for me, for during episodes and whatnot, calls, I'll have my notebook open. I barely write anything down. A few months ago, I was writing down every fucking thought that I had because I was like, "Oh, just in case. Oh, just in case. Oh, just in case." And usually at the end, I'd be, paying attention, or it was almost like a safety mechanism so that I could pay attention to make sure I had, a plan B or something if shit goes awry. And there was a period when I stopped writing so much down that I was having a really tough time like paying attention because there wasn't that, crutch as much anymore. And I was realizing, oh shit, I don't really have as much faith in myself as I thought possibly here. And so there was a lot of discomfort with that. And I went through like a couple calls, or one call specifically, that I just like couldn't hear anything or anyone because all of my concerns were coming up about like just being in a fucking conversation. But I didn't run back to I used my notebook a couple times, not gonna lie, but it wasn't like full on sprint back to need to write every little thing down. And there's been over the last, I don't know, month or two, like a lot more faith built in myself. And I found out like, oh, I wasn't paying full attention. I was kind of doing it with intention. Whereas, it's still not always super comfortable. And I'm not saying that I'm, perfect at it by any means, as if that's even possible. But I've definitely it's gotten a little bit easier, and there's less, and it's come with less concern about what I say too. Like it's come with that, which is like something I couldn't have thought would have happened, but it's far less concern about what I say, or the intention with which I'm talking, as opposed to thinking there's a right way to say it. And instead of being so caught in, trying to say the right thing, I've been able to, fuck, I kind of lost my train of thought at the end there. Just like ran away right in the middle of that. But
It's funny because I just went through that earlier. If you go and you listen back to what I was talking about earlier, I was on a good little roll there, and then all of a sudden I'm just like drifting. I'm like something about change. It's organic. We grow. Oh, there it is. And then all of a sudden it picked back up. But what's so funny is that exact thing you're talking about is that I could have just made a note and then look back at the note to go, right, that's the direction I'm going. Or I could just spin my wheels for a little bit. And what I love about the podcast is, frankly, it's a space to spin my wheels. And what's nice about doing so is that you don't judge yourself for losing your train of thought. You just kind of spin around in a circle for a little bit, and then all of a sudden it catches. And what you've done is actually reinforced your ability to recatch a train of thought that was probably quite complex, as opposed to referring back to the piece of paper, which you're reinforcing the need to do each and every time you do. And it's all just because, oh, well, somebody could be listening to the podcast. And if I'm not succinct, if I'm not getting this point down as short as possible, they're not getting the most value. It's like, dude, if they're in that much of a fucking hurry, they should just move on now. And that's very much the point, because why are we in a hurry? Why do we care if we lose our train of thought? At least we were on the track for a bit. That's going to reveal more track later.
Exactly, and that reminds me of, what the point I was eventually making a roundabout way to before was the thought of, not using my notebook so much, maybe. Like, that comes with a comparison to someone else doing something, thinking, "Oh, that's the right way to do it, is to remember all these things all the time, thinking that's correct and losing your train of thought is incorrect." And you can't come up with that unless you look around, unless you compare yourself to some idealized version of someone who you'd rather be or a version of yourself that you'd rather be. You need that comparison in order to even come up with an idea of what the right or the wrong way to do something is. Like having something that you have an aversion to, you need a comparison. You need someone else to look at and be like, "Oh, well, they're doing it that way. They never lose their train of thought, and that's the correct way to be. That's a better way to be." But nothing's saying that losing it or not losing it. There's probably a lot of people out there who talk a shitload, and people would actually prefer if they lost their train of thought more often, as opposed to constantly remembering and being perfect with everything that they do or say. And it's just funny how, like, we need that again, that comparison, which puts our faith in someone else for having the answer as if that's the right way to be. And yeah, without that comparison, it's just you're left with yourself. Like, what do you want to do? What do you want to try and find out, figure out? But there isn't the weight of needing to be something else because there's nothing to compare to, because there isn't, you're not looking so much to someone else either for guidance or to be able to compare that part of yourself you don't like, maybe.
I like where we started this conversation, very much about the experience of not solitude or isolation, because that's not quite correct, because that still implies that there could be a connection, like there's something that's missing, like there's some other. This is the problem with even the idea of I am versus what. Like, even the statement itself makes no sense when you let go of the division between the observer and the observed. And so I sent you a video yesterday, I believe it was, and it was about an apple in a box. And this box exists for eternity. Let's just say the box never degrades, right? And the apple in the box is never disturbed. And what I loved about this video is that they are talking about over the timeline of eternity. So in this undisturbed box, this apple would eventually degrade. And it would degrade so far down that eventually it would become dust. And then that dust would end up becoming energy itself over time, as it gradually shifted into different states of what it is, as it broke down farther and farther and farther and started to have a chemical reaction. And so the dust itself would end up becoming energy that was free floating within this box, filling up all the corners of it. And then that energy would start to interact with itself in different ways. And over the timeline of eternity, all of that energy in there would become every form that it possibly could. Over the timeline of eternity, we're not even talking billions of years, we're talking billions of years and more. And so in this undisturbed box, this energy that was an apple can become anything and will become anything, all variations of what it could be, until eventually it starts becoming the same variations over again, right? Eventually returning, in fact, to the shape of the apple, however, for however long. And nobody would know how necessarily, except that it's one of the forms that it could take. And so what I love about this is the fact that what they're saying is that energy, which we know, cannot be destroyed. It can only change form. It can only move. It can only transfer. It can only change over time. In the box, this is easy to observe. Over eternity, you can watch all of the changes that it could possibly do, all of the infinite changes that it could possibly do happening within this box over the course of eternity. But you see, the problem with this is the box, because there is no actual box in the way that there is no actual other. See, we keep thinking about the universe being within something because to us that makes sense, but the universe is not within something, as we know from the Nobel Prize in Physics last year on the non local universe. The universe is not in something. The universe is just itself pushing outward, very much like a dream. The farther you look in a dream, the more dream there is. It's not that you're moving beyond your own borders, you are the border. So the border doesn't actually exist except perceptually. And so all of the universe does not, in fact, exist within the box, but it is you. Not the you that you're thinking about, but the you without another, the me without a them, right? It's all within that singularity. And all of this is the same process over eternity of energy changing form and changing form and changing form and taking all the possible forms that it could possibly ever take. And that's what this experience is. So it's not so much that we are like the apple in the box. We're the apple and the box.
And as soon as that thought, because at first when you were saying, "Oh shit, Siri, fucking," I don't know what the hell she might have heard out of my mouth. That thought. Here's is Siri a woman? Yeah, usually it has a woman's voice. Anyway, the universe expanding. As you were saying that, like at first I was thinking of from I don't know, very zoomed out, like see all the galaxies in it pushing through. I don't know, blackness was kind of what I was seeing, but then you said something else, and then it shifted to just my perception because it's just coming for. Oh, you said like you're the barrier. You're the limitation. And so then, you start seeing it's like whatever you see, like how far that goes, the horizon or the room that you're in. Like there's a perceptual border to the situation that you're in, to the experience that you're having. But the only thing telling you that anything is separate from you is some idea of where you think you end. But until that ending is there, then it is just interacting with yourself. But you can't even you can't even say that. You can't even say that I'm interacting with myself because like immediately it's coming from my mouth. So like no one's gonna hear that, like, oh, the sounds are actually coming not even out of his mouth, but like from inside my ear. I don't know how to say it exactly, but like there's literally no way to fucking say it, dude. Like there's no way to get it across in a way that isn't immediately gonna be contorted by however someone sees themselves. It's just how you see yourself. And if there is the thought that I am what I think I am, any message is going to be filtered through that. It's like, oh, you're always looking at yourself. As soon as you think like, oh, well, I'm this, there's going to be it's not like you're going to start seeing your own face in other people from that perception, but there's like everything's veiled by another idea in a sense, as long as you're maintaining your idea, my idea of myself. But then, without that ending here, it's like whether it ends at the skin or it ends at, whatever I like the end of your vision in the immediacy, but then it's not necessarily just that. But at the same time, anything beyond your vision in the immediacy is an idea. Like it is immediately conceptual. So to me right now, like nothing else actually exists in reality besides this room that I'm in, you on my computer screen, which I'm creating an image of you in your house right now in my head. But to me, in reality, it's just what's right in front of me. And I even have ideas of like, with people listening or tuning into the live stream of, a room that they're in. Like maybe Amanda, I've seen her apartment before and seeing her, sitting in a room. That's an image I'm creating. But the reality is that to me doesn't actually exist necessarily right now. And in like what I'm seeing myself as, so like I am the extent of the person that I am that's listening, like, I am the names coming up and the comments coming up, but beyond that right now, there isn't so much, and then the thought of other perceptions, like if you're doing a live stream on a computer or something, there isn't so much a thought of there being a separate audience, and it's just like fucking you, but that's always the case, even as you quote unquote interact in person. It's not different than being on a live stream because it's still ideas being creative, but in person it seems so much more like, I feel like there is difference, but like, uh, it's just more realistic looking, or looks more like what I think I am. I don't know. So anyway, yeah.
I have spent so much time just thinking about this, and it's one of those conversations that you're never going to settle on something, because it really does depend on so many things, such as what you mean by you and what you mean by creating. So I like to look at it this way. See, to you, Andrew, or the listener, hello, uh, you could say that everything that's real to you right now is what's around you. It's the room that you're in, the seat that you're sitting on, the things that you're listening to. Those are the things that are real. But if you were to just spend some time, let's say eternity, where you are, and you were to think of all of the other things that could exist in reality over eternity, well, all of those things do exist because they're part of your here and now. You could say, well, this is the only thing that's real, but all of the potential within you, all of the potential things that you think are also a part of you, they're also real, quote unquote. Because what is real? Again, what do you mean by real? Is there an unreal? What do you mean by real other than more of you? And so you have infinite perceptions and infinite thoughts and infinite images and infinite feelings within yourself, and they all exist in potential. I'm one of them. And that's what's interesting about this, is that it's not that you've created me on your screen. I exist, motherfucker, in the same way that you exist. But we are not separate from this experience. We are both potential. What's interesting is, amidst all of the potential that we could experience, we are crossing paths. And we're crossing paths because somehow or another our paths align. Something about what I'm going through and what you're going through is appropriate to one another's story, because it's seamless. Remember, this is an exercise in intelligence. So it's not necessarily that you're creating me or I'm creating you, because there is no you or me. Right? It'd be like saying one corner of the tablecloth is responsible for the other corner of the tablecloth existing. It's like they couldn't exist without each other, right? Like that's the whole point. And so, because they are the same tablecloth, you and I are the same tablecloth, right? There is no division whatsoever. And so, when you're like, I'm creating you, vice versa, but with everyone doing all the same thing. Now, what's funny is that you could be like, that's really hard to envision, but your whole body's been doing it since you were born. All the cells in your body have been collectively working together to be you since you came into existence. All of us are working together to be me. It's just my idea of myself that gets in the way. And thus, this idea that I can create anything, that there is a me to create something there, or something to be created that doesn't already exist in potential. All of it just kind of falls apart. And what you're left with, as always, is your relationship with yourself now. Because you could look at it as, the manifestation thing. I'm making things happen. Or you could recognize that you're part of something happening. You're part of yourself happening. And in that, you have influence because it's you. It's not that you have control, but you do have influence. The more afraid you are, the more reasons you're going to find to be afraid. The more faith you have, the more reasons you'll find to have faith. That has influence. It changes the path. It's not control, because we're not creating anything. All we can do is just change how much we fight the current or not. But the current is us or you.
And so in that, influence, the potential for influence, that's like an experience that hasn't really been explored almost because I feel like that it's like the other end of that is ownership. Because as you were talking, I was like, oh, there's very little ownership in that. Like, that's uncomfortable, but it's like fucking uncomfortable for who? And then what's the alternative? Is the alternative fucking freedom? And in that influence, is that far and beyond, not even in comparison at all to that idea of ownership or some illusion of control? Like, I don't even fucking know because I feel like, and yet at the same time, it's like I've been doing it. I've been doing it in a sense and fucking doubting myself the whole fucking goddamn way. But who? And like, what is that just like a fucking experience that it's just an experience I've been having. Like, that's all it is. It's not even like I can't even say that it's necessarily, a good or a bad or a whatever. It's an experience. Like, there's no comparative way to have, like, you can't even compare it. There can't be a good or a bad because that implies that there's something else. It implies that there's another person. Like, to think of a certain experience, like, it necessitates something else or someone else to think this was a good experience or this was a bad experience. Like, it's just you. It's just experiencing, it's just experience playing out. Like, it's not even that you're experiencing anything. You're just being it. You're always just being it. And without that, with that, there isn't the weight of the concern so much in the same way that comes across so much so often when I do see myself as separate. Immediately there's that thought of the weight of it's like the thought there's something wrong, but you can't figure it out because like it's the perception that I'm something separate. Like, it's inherent to experience almost. Like, it's almost feels like I don't know, like original sin, like a convoluted original sin sort of thing. The perception of division that immediately comes with the potential for the entire fucking spectrum of every variation of concern and fear and doubt and everything. And so and you can't even have the experience of one versus the other either. So like there's not even the experience of s- s- without that without that potential. It's just how much are you digging in to that? Because as soon as there's the perception, and before I was like, oh shit. In my like back of my head, I was like, oh shit, this is going like feeling like a lot right now. And then immediately like short circuited my thought. It was like we're not saying that right now. And I didn't even know what I was gonna say, but I was like, I had a feeling, and then it was like, soup, nope. But anyway, so without that perception of division, I'm gonna try. I think that's where I was at. The perception of division, it's like there you can't experience no perception of division, but you can just recognize that that's not the reality of what's going on, unless and then there's less weight, and it's like such a subtle, tiny little shift where it's like some weight. It's just how much weight you want to hold on to for how long to maintain some other side of the spectrum of buying into some control and idea of certainty or ownership or anything, even ownership for words, whether you're afraid of them or whether you're happy about them, whether you're like, oh, that was a great thing to say, or oh, that was a terrible thing to say. It's still fucking ownership that I'm saying it, that I'm saying these things. And then therefore there's going to be concern about how it's said, because then there's the feeling like it's going to be perceived in the exact way that I'm perceiving myself saying it. That's never the case. So there doesn't have to be the ownership for them, because me owning it, having an opinion about it when it feels good, like, oh, I said a great thing, there's no guarantee of the perception of how it's heard. And so then what's the fucking point of taking that ownership besides to either make myself just to make myself feel some variation of that fucking spectrum of experience practically. It's like that's part of the reason that I fucking maintain, that opinion or the ownership of certain things, of anything, of any like, me doing this, like, oh, I have control over this body. It's like, ah, I don't even know. Uh, yes or no.
Yeah. Perception and division are synonymous. That's the whole thing. Like you can't perceive something. You can't have a perceiver and a perceived without division being the cornerstone of that experience. And that's very much why we get so lost in it because we're perceiving things all the time. So it's very difficult to get past that to recognize that perception is not truth. I want to go back to the apple in the box for a second because while it's true that the apple eventually would break down and become all kinds of different types of energy, it's also true that out of all of those variations, the apple would in fact also become people. It would also become organic. Like it would come, tiny little people. Imagine tiny little people in this box. Okay. And the box doesn't look like a box because, of course, the energy is also broken up to make like, orbing. Well, it's made up of little tiny gravity, right? On a very small scale. So you've got like little planets in the box now. They're floating in space. And you've got little people on that little planet. And this is all inside the box. And so the people are observing the reality of the box, but it's all the same energy. And eventually the people will disappear and the energy will break down and then it'll become a star and then it'll become all the way back to an apple again, then it'll go back to being people. And the whole point is that the energy never changes. It never stops being itself, regardless of when it's experiencing itself as both reality and people observing that reality. And that's the fun part about this, is that this is just a wonderful expression of a potential way that we could view ourselves. That's why I find humanity to be so very interesting, especially given how much of humanity is currently on the planet, because you really see how many variations can exist just on this one planet. This is just one timeline. Because again, the Earth will come and go infinite times over eternity, just like the apple will form and disappear infinite times over eternity. We forget this. Neil deGrasse Tyson was actually saying that the physical universe itself, at this point, right now, in this moment, is big enough to possibly contain infinite variations of everything because we don't know how big the universe is. We just know how much we can see. And that's already pretty fucking big. But that's all this is just energy changing form over what is the perception of time. Because again, at any time inside that box, you would see a before and an after happening within that change. But the box itself, although it is in eternity, that only ever means it's now. The experience in the box only ever happens now. Right? So all of those moments of change, all of those variations of what the apple could be, all happen in the here and now because time doesn't actually exist, but the perception of time does. Right? The before and the after experience, that exists, but only in perception. That's why time is such a trip, right? Because it's only a perception. It's a perception that we've come from there and we're going that way. Because in science, for example, they can predict through physics and physical laws of the universe and all of that what will happen next. That's the wonderful thing about physics is it's very good at predicting. Well, if that's rolling this way, it's going to roll that way, right? But what they can't understand is why that doesn't happen backwards. Because if the equation happens moving forward, then it can also happen moving backwards. But we are still stuck in this persistent illusion of moving from the past to the future, despite only ever experiencing now. And again, because we are the box and everything within it ourselves. This is what I always say, like, no matter when reality is happening, it's always happening as me here now.
And so then if you're looking at the box and seeing, like, say you're in that example outside of the box, like the apple going from, the start to whatever it goes through and back, like there's no timeline in that. You can see it's more, you can see the morphing of it. It's just morphing here now. And so with that, like as as you're talking, like fuck. So it's like I've always kind of maintain this perception like, oh, moving forward through time. But with that, and in the Apple example, because it starts as an apple, like shows it going through all variations and breaking down into universe, whatever, and then it comes back to being an apple. And so the breakdown of the apple and the coming back together, it's not to say that it breaks down in the same way that it comes back to being the apple, but there is a sense of like a push and a pull simultaneously here now. And so then it's like, the ties on both get cut as opposed to like moving into the future or from the past. There's not the idea of like an arrow so much anymore because there's no other experience. It's just, and in order to maintain the arrow, I have to maintain the perception of like me being separate, like me being something separate. But if this is just my experience and everything in it right now is just my experience, it's not to say that there can't be that idea of there being, that arrow through time anymore, but it's not as intense, I guess. Like it's not as specific to me going through it. All of a sudden it's like, oh, this room, like this is decaying in different ways and breaking down in different ways and shifting right now. It just seems to be shifting more slowly, and that's why, it's just slowed matter. But this is still that sort of in the box, the apple disintegrating, and I'm disintegrating, quote unquote disintegrating, or whatever words you want to use. Like right now, I'm shifting, changing, and there's the process of like growing up and then breaking down, basically. And it's all in this sort of flow. And so it's not just that, and the other thought I had was it's not just that I'm looking at myself right now, but and and it's also not to say that everyone else is on a different timeline, but it's like you're just a variation of me with varied experiences, like having gone through. And I know, I don't know, maybe that sounds like the same thing to me, but to seeing like, oh, I'm always just seeing myself. It's like, no, everyone is a variation of me with their experience. But then there is no there, and there is no other. So there's not like other, and that's what I was saying before was like there's no fucking, it's like all these overlapping timelines because there's no space between the timelines either. And then you really start get that feeling like you're almost in a, I don't know, fucking spider web in a sense where there isn't, you're moving through and you can almost like feel the air in a sense. It's not that you're moving through empty space anymore. Like there isn't a disconnect between you and everything else. And so you're not really moving through anything but yourself. But as soon as, and it's so easy, so quick for the thought of me as something separate to come up. Like it's such a fucking thin veiled layer, but it's just a perception. It doesn't actually change the reality of what's happening. Like it never actually changes the reality of what's happening. It just changes the experience to some degree, because now I'm thinking of myself as something separate. But that's all that it doesn't actually change that reality that you're just moving through yourself. You're not something moving through space. Like you're as much the environment as you are fucking the environment, which is, yeah. Cause as soon as I'm like, oh, I am my environment, it's like, yeah, but not the separate you.
It's so much fun, right? Like this is why it's this never-ending thing. You can't ever settle because you're always getting a deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper look at what's sitting there the whole time, but it's so hard to get your head around it. Like you're like, okay, so I'm seeing a variation of me. It's like yes and no, right? You're seeing a variation of the characters that you can play, but that's not you. You are in fact not just the character you're playing now, but all the characters. In fact, you're not even all the characters. There's no characters. There's no division between them. So you're this whole giant morphing thing of potential. That's what you are. You're the unity. You're the all of it, as well as the character within it. Right? That's the thing. We're like, oh, that's a variation of me. It's like you're a variation of you. Right? That's the funniest part. But on the other hand, you're not, because you're still the whole of you as well. That's what you see when you're looking at somebody else. But what gets me out of all of this, because again, this is all potential moments. So Ray is a potential lifetime that could exist, right? And what's cool is that based on my quote unquote choices, I get to like navigate through that potential, right? Because if you think about it, there are infinite branches that my life could have taken, right? And all of those branches do in fact exist. There's a me that's on that path right now. right? Because it exists. So I'm experiencing this one. And what's really cool about it is that there's the potential in this one for me to meet somebody that's like Andrew, because it's appropriate to the variation I'm experiencing. And so then Andrew comes into my life. And what's funny is that it's simultaneous. It's simultaneous and seamless that the same is true for me and Andrew. Andrew's life is a potential path. He could have taken many others. Now, what's appropriate for this path is for him to be a Ray-like character. And so it's funny because you're creating me and I'm not creating you. We're just on fucking similar paths. Like we're just appropriate to each other's story. And that's true for however long it's true, and then we move on and change continues to happen. But that's what it is. It's so funny to watch it. This is why the manifestation thing is just way blown out of proportion. It gets so distorted by the idea of me, right? Me and a reality outside of myself that I'm trying to influence, rather than everything being a reflection of who I am, because that's the variation. The variation isn't necessarily the storyline, but the mentality that drives those storylines. There's a version of Ray that's still bitter and pissed off in a totally different place, right? What changed? The choices he made based on his perception of himself, on his relationship with himself. That's the fucking variation, right? More than anything else, it's the variation of our relationship with ourself, our relationship between the observed and the observer. And I find that to be fascinating, because that's all I see when I talk to people is various phases of the recognition that the observer and the observed are the same. Sometimes I see myself really far from that recognition. Sometimes I see myself much closer. But that's all I see is myself within that spectrum.
And there's nothing you can do to convince anyone else, anyone else of that, because then you're not doing like who? Yeah, exactly. Like, see, there's no way, because as soon as you try, you're not like, what the fuck are you trying to get across? That there's someone else to get something across to? That's what good does that do
Exactly.
yourself? And even as I'm saying it, I'm like, what good does that do anyone else? I'm like, oh shit. Because they can't like I can't, it's not even that I'm necessarily expressing these things to try to fucking help someone, but at the same time, there's like I don't know, sometimes there's a subconscious sort of like, oh, this one, maybe this will resonate in a certain way. And it's not to say that there's something wrong with that, but at the same time, like I'm just talking, I've always just been talking to myself, for myself, just shifts based on how I see myself. And so if you realize that everything's just playing out as it's playing out, you do have influence, absolutely, but there isn't a right way for that to go. It's like the depth of your relaxation through the variations in experience, through the shifts in environment, through all of those things. So it's never been about even doing well or performing properly in a situation, like doing the right thing, saying the right thing. It's just whatever the fuck happens, relaxing as best you can. And it's not even that that's what it's about, because it's still just variations in experience. Like it's still just an option. Like they're all options and ways of and certain options come with, certain perceptions, certain degrees of tension versus relaxation come with different experiences, but through any experience, you shift that experience immediately based on your state of relaxation, because going through something can be impacted in an infinite number of ways based on how you respond to it. And so relax, and they're all going to shift the experience, because there's not one experience. Like the experience itself is constantly shifting based on you. So there's not even like even on a episode like this, it's not even that there's a start and an end to the episode. It's just a shifting in experience. And it's not to say like, oh, this thing went like, this is an experience. It's like this right now, this word that I'm saying, the sound that I'm making is the experience. And so I've held on to sometimes this idea like, oh, well, I can't, especially when I used to get angrier and more frustrated about things. Like, oh, I can't let this go now because I've been frustrated this whole time. That would be like, losing. It felt like a defeat almost, dropping anger in a lot of ways. Like, oh, I can't do that because I've invested so much. And then finally just kind of like subsides over time. But it could have been just that, snap of a moment. And I guess that comes with sensitivity and the realization that, there's not a whole situation to anything. Like there aren't even fucking situations. Like situations are just a conceptual idea. Also, like it's just you right now. Like this, there's not even a fucking like line on either side. There's not a space in between it. So every single thing that you're going through, you can drop quickly, like the concern, the resistance to whatever. Like you can drop it in the moment because like that's the only point that you can drop it. And sure, there's going to be the variation in your willingness to do that. Kind of like Ray's example before. If he was him in my situation, like things would probably, they would be, I don't know, funny. We'd have to televise it or something. Because the shifts would be so rapid that it's not to say that it wouldn't make sense for like it would just be a different variation that doesn't involve, and again, I'm like, doesn't involve me. It's like, no, that's not the case. It's just like there is a variation in which that does play out in infinite experience. Like there's a variation where there's some sort of, trajectory or whatever where that does play out because every situation is playing out. So it's not even, fucking A, I'm not even like choosing situation. I'm just here. Like I'm just here.
Yep. You're just here, and your experience as the individual, because I like to tackle that one first. It's the primary focus of this experience, as it were, is largely dependent on how resistant you are to yourself. It really is that, how much you're willing to express yourself without second guessing, without getting in your own way, how much you feel like you're in a box of your own creation, regardless if you're projecting that onto other people perceiving you. It's really still your own judgment. It's all of that. And so your experience in this character is basically influenced according to how much you're willing to just be yourself and express yourself accordingly without fear. Right. And as we've talked about before, that doesn't mean being out there talking all the time. Sometimes expressing yourself authentically means just sitting down quietly, because that's reflective of what part of the process you're in. Expression doesn't necessarily have to be communication. Expression can be just pacing around your house, maybe, or dancing or anything, or just sitting quietly. Expression is whatever it is you're doing, whatever it is that authentically reflects what part of the process you're going through in yourself. That's expression. And so this is true for you individually. And again, individually is a perception, which begs the question that if your life, Andrew, or the listener, is influenced by your lack of resistance, by your willingness to accept and have faith and just express yourself accordingly, how much of your life is affected by that when you let go of the idea of your life just being the character? Is all of that benefit only happening to the character because you identify that way? Can the rest of us benefit from your faith if you recognize you're us? Does it become easier for us to tap into that in ourselves the more we recognize that we are each other? This is the road that we're talking about. This is what dualistic unity is all about. It's the fact that your path is really determined by your resistance or your acceptance. But your path isn't just the characters. That's just the path that you're holding on to. That's the path you think you're on. The more you let that go, the more you realize we're all your path. And everything you do changes everything.
And so what is there to fight or hold back, right? And you can just, however you feel, like whatever you're going through, there isn't a correct or an incorrect way of doing it or going through something. It always just comes down to your own judgment. So like in a conversation or something, like, even the idea of there being a right or wrong way for it to go just comes down to you. Like, it just comes down to what I'm thinking, right? Like the idea, and you can hear certain things, but even hearing certain things does nothing to the reality of whatever is happening. Like, it all comes from me, like, every perception comes from me because it's always just interacting with myself. Like, it's always just variations, every conversation, every interaction. So there's not even a judgment that isn't taken in by me in a certain way that can't have impact on everything else. And so it's interesting when and when the realization that it's not you separate from anything, like, there isn't quite so much weight or fight or concern for whatever's playing out and however you're doing or how things are going or what's happening, right? And so you might as well just keep going without a need for it to go in a certain like way or direction or whatever it is. Like, there's no right or wrong thing to do. It's just the sensitivity and willing. It's like, how much do you want to hold on to? Like, how much weight do you want to hold versus let go of? And that's all it ever comes down to. But it comes down to just me. But again, not me. It's just like how much ownership I'm taking for whatever is coming out or being expressed or being shown or whatever it is. Because it's just me having impact on myself, influencing myself all the time.
Right now, always right now. And this is, we forget because we lose faith in our influence in terms of what now is, because now is everything. There is no now that isn't connected to all the other nows, right? Now is everything. This is where you have influence. This is where things are happening, as it were. And we forget that. And a good example of that would be a conversation that I had, I don't know, probably 6 months ago. We talked about it briefly, but it was this person on TikTok who was adamant about vegetarianism, adamant that anybody who wasn't a vegetarian, anybody who was eating meat, anybody who was contributing to that industry, anybody who was buying meat products for any reason whatsoever was contributing to this mass evil. And they had great points. It's not that they didn't. And I've talked about this previously, but they were so determined to fight that evil, so determined to focus on a future where that didn't exist, that they were burning bridges with everybody who didn't agree with them off the hop in the moment, rather than finding a way to empathize with those people, connect with those people, and therefore be the kind of person that they might go, this person's got a good point. I'm going to listen to them. That person was instead so focused on a future that would be better that they were missing the moment where they could have actually had more efficient influence just by letting go of their need to get somewhere so quickly. Realizing that the connection to the person you're talking to has far more influence than you going, we need to go that way now. Because it's empathy that turns the ship. The ship has been turned towards control forever. If we want to change direction, we have to change the direction of our soul. We have to change the direction of our relationship with ourself, which is empathy, to surrender, to recognize that that control is always coming from a place of fear and always perpetuates that fear. Right? To recognize that this moment, this conversation right now has more influence over humanity than you thinking that everybody should be doing the thing that you think is right. Because at least here there's a connection, which means that there's change happening. That's all that's important. That's why I love these conversations. That's why I love our Discord. That's why I love our Patreon groups and our events and all of that, because the point isn't to get there and find spiritual enlightenment. It's to get there and actually just be in reality, a reality that is always unified. always unified. We just superimpose division on top of it. That's why I always laugh when people are like, well, it's not very unifying to challenge people's beliefs. It's like, what do you mean? We're unified. There's nothing to do. Like, there's nowhere to go. It's just that we keep doing shit on top of it. That's what we're doing. We can only add the perception of division. Unity cannot be split. Like, it never stops being what it is. We just perceive it differently.
Because as soon as there's the thought that we're becoming more unified, it's like even saying that, like more unified, like closer to that, it implies that it's not to say that it can't be done, but at what point is it done? And then you think about that. And if all of these, you know, variations of things are coming together, then it's like the point in which it becomes quote unquote unified is still here now, because then it's like, oh, the recognition that it's all not divided, like, is that all that it is? And the opportunity for that is right now. So there's not this timeline of the pieces coming together. It's like they already are. But if there's the thought of there being a timeline and things connecting, it's like then you get to that point and you realize the thing that it's been all along. Oh, it's been the same puzzle the whole time. Like there hasn't been any degree of disconnect from yourself throughout the entire time. And like that's there's not even another experience to be had. So of course every moment that you're interacting with someone, like the thought of it going a certain way, being correct or incorrect, doing it the right or the wrong way, can't even be, because there can't be some other moment to compare it to. Like it's just a variation of you interacting with you. And it's funny because like you can say all these things and I know I've said it lots and lots of times, but like it's not, you can't even say it, and you can say it and not realize it necessarily because it sounds like it's, and even saying realize it, it's like realize what, and yet realize, yeah, that let go of what.
I think it's the problem is more or less that we think that we're realizing something rather than we are the realization of that thing. Like our life is the potential realization that we are the observed. That's all our lives are the potential realization of unity, or the potential experience of unity versus the potential experience of division from ourselves. That's it. And so it's not about necessarily realizing it so much as just continuing to peel away the false certainty, so that way there's nothing more than just continuous revelation, right? All you're doing is seeing more and more of yourself, which is all you've ever really been doing, except you're superimposing things again that are getting in the way of what's actually happening, right? So it's interesting because, as we were saying, it can't be rushed, but things start to change as you let go of your idea of yourself being the human being just, the body, the idea of, in my head, quote unquote. That one's tricky, because we genuinely think that because we're looking out of our brains, that's where we're residing, as it were, right? But nobody's ever been able to identify where consciousness is, because consciousness is a property of reality. It's expressed through everything that's alive, everything that's able to express it. And so when I walk down the street, it's not that I'm looking at myself so much as there is a feeling of myself being present in everything, being expressed through everything. You start to feel more like mycelium than you do the mushroom, as it were, which means that you see the mushrooms differently. But this isn't just true for people, but plants and animals. Nothing gets me more than when I'm walking down the street and it's almost like you can feel the plants around you breathing. You can almost feel them growing however slowly, because everything is change, everything is growth, everything is will. And it's your will, it's our will, it's will. And we're all the same will. And so when you get out of your head and you stop thinking about yourself, you start feeling yourself being expressed through everything. Changes your perspective of life. It changes your approach to everyone. Empathy becomes more than just, an intellectual exercise in compassion.
Yeah, there's, like, almost more of a depth to it in a sense, like, the Jesus, I mean, interacting with yourself in each and every moment, like, there's gonna be it's just a different it's not like this surface sort of experience, like, you see, "Oh, this interaction that I'm having, like, it's being had back to me, by myself." Like, and so again, back to the ownership, it's a lot harder to take ownership for whatever's being done when there isn't the thought that I exist behind my eyes, but in front of my eyes. And then it's almost hard to reach back for the thoughts so much, like purposefully run back to it. It's almost like you can feel yourself, like running from, like almost feel the feeling of like running back into your mind in a sense, because it's like you've become inverted and now everything that you're doing, the words are just coming out not from like behind your mouth, they're just you're interacting with yourself. There's not a right or a wrong way to do it. You're just continuing to do it. And you can come up with anything you want to do or say or whatever, and you can just keep doing that. And then as soon as there's a thought of like, oh, you're doing something incorrectly, it's like relative to what? And then it's like I gotta think about that. What if and it's so then it's just, oh, it's just me coming up with something being incorrect. It's not on anyone else because it's just coming. You see more clearly that if you're running back into your mind, that it's not coming from anywhere else. And the words that you're hearing are just from yourself too, but it's not about yourself. That's separate. Yeah.
That's why this is
Mm.
so fun and challenging at the end of the day, is because, see, for years, I wanted to save the world. I wanted to help people. I wanted to, help people wake up. And the problem with that is it was firmly rooted in an idea of myself. It was an idea that I could save the world, that there was a separation between me and said world. And what I didn't recognize at the time was that the degree of that commitment to that perception of a separation between me and the world was the perception of division that I was perpetuating. I was embodying an idea of the world needing saving, which just perpetuates the division that goes with that perception. Right now, I'm addressing the world, which means there are people who think the right way, people who think the wrong way, right? There's something I need to fix instead of recognizing that all comes from my perception of myself, needing to feel like I'm in control, needing to feel like I have the right way for everyone, needing to assume that everybody's journey is supposed to be like mine. Like, there's so much that goes with that. And at the end of the day, all you have is the feeling of being yourself right now, whether you feel like you're being yourself or whether you feel like you don't, or rather that you're not. And that's it. And so if you focus on that, everything changes accordingly. But the whole reason you want to save the world, the whole reason you want to have control is just because you perceive it as separate. You're afraid of it. Oh God, I don't know what it's going to do. You've never known. You've never known. You've never known what's going to happen in your own life. You don't know what's going to happen in 5 minutes. You could think like, oh, I have a choice. I have express. You could die. You don't know. You don't know. And that's been true about everything. But you do know that your experience is influenced by how afraid of that you are, which is basically how much faith you have in yourself. But if you let go of the idea of yourself, then it comes down to how much faith you have in all of us. And that really changes everything in terms of how you deal with people. So what we were saying earlier, like when people are like, "What would you do in my position?" What you're doing. And the reason that I can say that with sincerity is because I have faith in you. I have faith in you in the same way that I have faith in myself because they're the same thing.
Well said. Yeah, without yeah. Uh, yeah, because any feeling of a lack of faith that you have in anyone else or the thought of someone needing help, like, the reality being that you're just interacting with yourself, the reality being that you're trying to come up with someone who needs help is immediately creating this and not even creating, it's, perceiving this thought of there being someone else to save, and like, so much of that comes down to just wanting to feel better about myself. Like, that's the reality. Oh, I'm helping people, saving people, helped all this out. Like, what the fuck else could it be coming from? Right? Like, what the fuck else would it be? It's like, no, it's about them. Like, yeah, but you're immediately making it about you by thinking of them as them, which is kind of like that's I don't know. I feel like that's kind of I was gonna say that's tricky, but at the same time, it's like, shit. Like, so you can't try to save any like you can't even have the thought of acting in a way like how much of the fucking world I feel like is all about saving the world, other people, this, that. But all of it, like that whole idea is reinforcing division, reinforcing someone else, something else. And so without that, then it's not about saving anything at all. It's just about being here. Like even that, yeah.
Yeah,
Like
but
you
to
gotta
such a large organic degree that we just can't fathom it right now, right? Like, give you an example. There's this debate happening in Canada right now about the carbon tax because there's a carbon tax on oil and heating and whatnot, and it's making it very difficult for some people to afford these utilities. And so there's this giant conversation like, should we have it? Should we not have it? And the reason that we're at this point is frankly because we're so polarized. There's people who depend on the oil industry, and there's people who don't want to pay that tax. There's people who are like, well, the environment. But the whole reason that we've gotten here is because industry has taken over, corporations have become corrupt, we've cut corners, we've used, all kinds of oil-based products. We've really reinforced the rich. We've contributed to this, unbalanced power structure for so long. And why? Because we don't talk to one another. We don't take advantage of those moment to moment interactions. Like I said, a lot of us will donate to a charity and then avoid our neighbors. Oh God, they're looking at me, right? And it's just like I'm making a difference while I'm perpetuating this feeling that I'm afraid, while I'm perpetuating this division that I see from everybody. It's our moment to moment interactions. We just don't understand how being in those moment to moment interactions would change the world. You see, there's no control there, right? But we can't understand because right now we're so torn apart that we don't even understand how to work together towards something. Like we actually have to think, well, no, we need to force people to share, right? This is this whole idea towards socialism. Like, no, we need to force people to share. It's like you're not changing their nature. That's just eventually going to be corrupted again. The only thing that's going to change their nature is you sharing. That's it. Or at least not clinging as much. That's going to change things. Is it going to change the world overnight? No. Will it change the people in your life? Probably. At least those that are willing to change one way or another. And will it change the people in their life? Yeah. And their life and their life. And the ripples go on. And you don't get to see how that plays out. But it's all you. And in the same way, a choice to have faith in yourself ripples throughout your individual life. A choice to have faith in everything as you ripples through everything as you. This is the future that's possible for us. but it's so different and contradictory to what we've been invested in terms of a long-term vision of progress and control, rather than an actual genuine relationship with everybody that is a part of us.
Because in comparison of, coming together through letting go of that need to get anyone anywhere and starting to just interact with yourself, to thinking that, someone's separate and in control, and the trajectory we've been on, it's only reinforcing this perception of division, all of the control, this idea of progress, as opposed to just not even getting anything anywhere, but just continuing on and recognizing that, yeah, it's not gonna be an overnight thing, but then again, that's just a perception. We experience time based on so many varying factors, and again, it's just an experience of time. So the ripples that you have don't even play out over time. It's like drop after drop after drop influence, and enough depth. Right now, those ripples get bigger, like how dug in, and that's the influence that's had, and that plays out and spans out through just one interaction, spans out over through infinity, eternity, in that sense, and the depth of those interactions, which it's again, it's not even like there can't be a right way to do it. It's just you being involved, you looking at yourself, interacting with yourself, as opposed to wondering about yourself and thinking about yourself. It's just being with yourself. And as soon as there's a thought of, oh, well, what about this? There's like the, running back to some fucking thought of control. Like, no, you can just like letting that go and just being where you're at again. That's just it. And it's not, again, it's not a right or a wrong way to do it. It's just being there.
Which is why, as I said repeatedly, just show up at the retreat. It's really all you need to do. You've already become everything you've become up until getting to that retreat. That's everything that's necessary, because that's the experience you're having. Just show up. That's it. But that's true for everything in your life. Just arrive. Let things play out. It's all you need to do. But what's funny is that you're talking like we don't know how long it'll take. These ripples just form. I have been with that in mind for 20 years. For 20 years, most of that not finding this conversation with anyone, knowing that at least I'm here rippling, not needing to know where it goes. And then all of a sudden, dualistic unity. And then within a year, our retreat. And now, a year later, we've had eight retreats. And we're now having our largest retreat in several days. And then after that, we're going to have more events, and more people are getting involved with this discussion. And we're going to find more ways to reach out and have these in-person meetings as well as online meetings, because the discussion itself is growing. Well, why is it growing? Because we're having fun with it. It's not even about the conversation. It's about our relationship with ourselves. The conversation can't be the cornerstone. The conversation is just a way for you to express what you're learning about your relationship with yourself. That's all it is. And that's why dualistic unity amazes me. That's why every day I'm just glad that it exists, that it has its own gravity. And that gravity exists only because it doesn't need anyone to come and find it. It's just waiting for anybody whose potential journey finds it appropriate to find. And I love that. I love the fact that dualistic unity is something that variations of you, variations of me, can stumble across when it's appropriate for their journey. So, to our listener, I'm so glad you're here. We are coming to the end of our episode, though. So, I wanted to say, Andrew, man, it has been 5 seasons, and 2 years, a little over 2 years that we've been doing Dualistic Unity, my life has changed so very much in the last 2 years. And I have to say, I am incredibly grateful and inspired by everything that you have gone through, everything that you've expressed, everything you've questioned, all the bad shit, all the good days and the bad days that you've gone through. I can't tell you how grateful I am that you have been willing to share that journey with me, because it is a journey that I've gone through and could not share to the degree that I've wanted to. And I appreciate your courage. I appreciate just your willingness to be here and watch this community grow, this community of individuals that frankly would not be here if you weren't willing to be the individual and the all of everything yourself. The conversation could not exist if you weren't willing to be here, appropriate as the next participant in it. And this is true for everybody who is a part of this conversation. Thank you so much. And I know that's just from me, but it's also from yourself. There is a part of you that is so very happy you are on the path you're on. So incredibly happy every fucking day. I couldn't be more excited for season 6, man. I couldn't be more excited to see what comes out of Jackie and Amanda with their episodes of Dualistic Unity Real. Do check those out. I know there's going to be one recorded later on today. I'll pass it over to Andrew, man. But all that gratitude aside, because I know you're going to go, well, you too, Ray. I know you're growing, and I know that too, because you are me, and we're all growing together.
You took the words out of my mouth, but I'm gonna say them anyway. It's been a pleasure, man, working together and doing whatever the fuck this is, because I still don't have any idea. And as soon as I do, it's not that. And it's been a lot of fun, going back and forth with all of this and having someone, because I'm coming at, in my variations of clarity and whatnot. I'm as surprised as you are that there's anyone else who is willing to have this conversation. I know it's, from one perspective, we're n- coming from different journeys, but at the same time, we're not. So it's been awesome to see. And I know, the changes I've seen in you have been, you know, maybe different variations than the changes in me, but at the same time, from another perspective, they're not so different in a lot of ways. So it's been a lot of fun, being able to go back and forth. And I'm just gonna keep rambling because I'm still pretty fucking stoned. But I appreciate everyone who's tuned in to any of the episodes, the people, and you know who you are, who are on all the Patreon groups and having the conversation, willing not just to have the conversation with us, and not even just to have the conversation with someone else necessarily, but just to be willing to be yourself and do it on your own. Like, take that responsibility for your life and then the freedom that comes with it. So it's not always the easiest thing to go through. It's rarely the most comfortable thing to go through, but it's been a lot of fun. And I know at least that I cannot know any of your experiences, but that we all know that. And there's a shared intensity to it that is fun to come together and chat about from time to time. So yeah, fuck yeah, excited for season 6, and this season finale has been a lot of fun.
Hell yeah. Thanks everyone for joining us. I look forward to seeing you in season 6. Hopefully, you'll be in one of the retreats coming up. Do check them out on the website if you have not as yet. It's life changing because it's you as life changing. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to wrap up here. Take care.